In 1993, a hideous crime took place in West Memphis, Arkansas. 3 8-year-old boys were stripped naked, hogtied, mutilated, and murdered. Within weeks, 3 local teens were picked up and charged with their murder. One of the 3 was Damien Echols, an 18-year-old from a broken family who had been in and out of jail and mental institutions. Echols and his 2 friends were all convicted and, in Echols' case, sentenced to death. But years later, new DNA tests revealed an unidentified person at the crime scene. While the 3 men were never exonerated, the DNA tests led to their release in 2011. Now Damien Echols lives in Salem and has a new book, Life After Death, and Damien Echols is here. Welcome. We were just talking about the Tsarnaev case and the death penalty, and one of the things you say in your book is the difference between life in prison and the death penalty is notoriety and the amount of attention. This case, your case got, I remember it exactly. I remember where I was when I first read the story 20 years ago this summer. Do you think that's the reason you got the death penalty?
It was. The local media in Arkansas had inflamed the public to such a degree that by the time we walked into the courtroom, the jury saw the trial as pretty much a formality they had to get through in order to sentence me to death.
And you were tried separately from the other 2?
I was tried with Jason Baldwin.
Mm-hmm. While you weren't exonerated, do you feel that you've been exonerated in a sense, that through this, the fact that there was something else found at the scene, that I know you feel that you are innocent, but do you feel you are exonerated?
In a certain sense. I think in a public sense, you know, since I've been out, I can't even count how many people have come up to me and said, I'm sorry for what you went through, I'm glad you're out. But in a legal sense, we still have this black cloud hanging over our heads. We had to take this thing called an Alford plea.
Alford.
I had never even heard of it before it came up in our case. What it means is you're maintaining your innocence, but you're accepting the guilty plea that they're offering you. So what it allowed the state of Arkansas to do, to this day, in the entire history of the state of Arkansas, they've never exonerated anyone. They still maintain in the briefs that the Attorney General's office files that they have never so much as sentenced an innocent person to prison in the state of Arkansas. This plea allowed them to maintain that.
A large part of the book is about your childhood growing up, and you know, I don't know how to characterize it. It wasn't great. You had a terrible relationship with an abusive stepfather. You didn't have a great relationship with either one of your parents. Your mother was kind of in and out of your life. I mean, by the time you were picked up, did you, and you'd been in and out of mental institutions, so he had already accused you of, you know, practicing satanic things and stuff. Did you feel like you were going to be targeted, or did it come as a surprise to you when you were picked up?
Oh, I knew I was. I'd been harassed by the police department for probably 2 years before these murders ever even happened. So whenever they started coming to my house about this, I thought it was just more of the same. We had in Arkansas what they call, it was some sort of, they styled themselves as an occult task force. These people who believed that Satanists were responsible for pretty much every single thing that went on in the state. These were the people who had targeted me based on the books I read, based on the clothes I wore, based on the music I listened to. So whenever they showed up at the house and started questioning me about these murders, I actually thought it's just more of the same. Sooner or later, they're actually going to figure this out once they do some actual police work, and then they'll go away and leave me alone. I had no idea it was going to go to the extent that it did.
Did you ever practice any of those things?
No. I don't think, you know, they used to, these people were slightly unhinged in a way. They actually would go through our neighborhood and show people Polaroids of animals that were obviously roadkill, like possums that had been hit by cars, and they would say, this is proof that there's been some sort of animal sacrifices going on. What do you know about this? Eventually, the guys that were responsible for this, one of them went to prison in Florida for stealing from the police department. One of them was forced to resign after he was caught molesting a teenage boy, and one of them was shot and killed.
So describe death row. I know you've done it in the book, and I read it, but one thing I found fascinating, the 3 of you were convicted. Those 2, they get life in prison, so they go through this kind of process where they get mentally evaluated, and they're in a place for like 3. You go straight to prison.
I walked out of the courtroom and straight into a cell on death row where I spent most of the next 20 years. You're in solitary confinement. At first I wasn't. I was in solitary confinement for about the last decade that I was there. They just
You went to a different prison.
Exactly. They decided they were going to ship everyone on death row to a different prison, and for the last decade before I got out, I was in solitary confinement. They say you're allowed, that you're in your cell for 23 hours a day. You're taken out for 1 hour, but out, what that actually means is they take you out of your cell and put you in another cell. I wasn't exposed to sunlight in almost 10 years. It's part of what destroyed my vision. I had next to no human contact for almost 10 years other than with guards who wanted to hurt me. So coming back out into the world, into mainstream society, you know, people just think you're going to be happy and excited that you're out of prison, and you are, but at the same time there is an incredible amount of anxiety and stress and fear that goes along with it, that it takes a long time to work your way through.
You said that the guards destroyed a lot of your notes because you kept journals. You said that was very cathartic for you. How in the world did you recall the detail, the names, the prison nicknames, the people who you said harassed you as a child? Every interaction in your life is recreated in such vivid detail. How did you do that?
Well, actually what happened is I started to lose my memories. You know, I'd been in prison for so long that I could remember things, for example, that when I was out, pizza had been my favorite food, but I could not actually remember what it tasted like anymore, just because it had been so long since I'd had it. And I didn't want to lose everything else. So that's why, a huge part of why I started writing, because it allowed me to relive these things in my head, to sort of engrave them into my brain. And I would write about them not just one time, but many times, over and over and over, to preserve them, and also because it allowed me to some extent to re-experience things that were dear to me, that meant something to me, other times, other places, other people, besides my life in prison. It was a huge part of what kept me sane in there.
You also had a spiritual revival through someone there, and
I did.
And you described, they said he told you got to make your prison cell a school and a monastery.
He said, you have a choice. You can turn your cell into a monastery and keep growing as a person, or you can sit in here and you can rot inside. And that's the absolute truth. There's no sort of development, no sort of momentum in there unless you create it yourself. And that person, eventually, he led in an indirect way to, over the years I received ordination in the Rinzai Zen tradition of Japanese Buddhism. It's the same tradition that used to train the samurai in ancient Japan. And that was another huge thing that helped preserve me in there.
Why do you spell magical with a K?
It differentiates it from pulling rabbits out of hats. Well, when you spell magic with a K, it's an Old English spelling. It means it's a combination of Gnostic Christianity, esoteric Judaism, and a lot of the energy work techniques associated with Taoism. That's what the K means. When you see the K, you know you're reading about a spiritual tradition. Without the K, just M-A-G-I-C, it's sleight of hand, stage magic.
You got to know, not friends with, but you got to know everybody on death row. In your prison, and then they would come and they would go. What was that like, watching somebody walk out the prison knowing that they were going to be executed? And it's firing squad in
No, it was lethal
like
injection. Lethal injection, but it gets worse every single time. In the time I was there, they carried out between 25 and 30 executions. Right after I got there, they did 3 at once. And it's like every single one they do, for some reason the horror sinks in a little deeper and a little deeper. I don't know why. I don't know why that happens, but it gets more horrific with every single execution. I always tell people, imagine where you work if one day people came in and they chose one person you work with at random and carried them out back and shot them. That's what it's like being on death row.
Were you worried? Were you scared? Were you terrified about it happening to you?
No, actually I wasn't, and the reason for that is the only thing I can compare it to is whenever they teach race car drivers how to drive, they always tell them, don't look at the wall. You know, look at your instrument panel, look at the other cars, look at the track. Because if you look at the wall, sooner or later you're going to drive into it. Well, that's how I looked at things like that, like execution, like them killing me. I didn't look at it. I didn't think about it. I would have people ask me, you know, what would your last words be? What would your last meal be? I didn't think about those things because that's not the direction I wanted my life to move in.
You met your now wife through a prison visit. She wrote to you.
We've been together for 18 years. We met in 1996 when she saw the very first documentary that had been made about the case by HBO. It was called Paradise Lost, and she lived in New York at the time. We started a correspondence, and it led to eventually her moving to Arkansas, us getting married in 1999, and she pretty much took over my legal case. She did more work than the attorneys and investigators put together. There were times we couldn't even afford to pay legal fees, and she would take out personal loans just to pay off our legal bills.
You said you weren't even allowed to touch her until the day that you were married.
The day we got married was the very first time we were allowed to physically touch.
Were you ever allowed conjugal visits?
No.
Death row, they don't. I'm surprised they actually allowed you a physical visit.
They didn't like it, but it was something that a previous warden had started, who actually treated, people like human beings. And after he was gone, it was hard for them to get rid of it. If not for that, we wouldn't
talk about that a little bit, because, I mean, you write pretty much the way I would expect prison to be, but a big part of it is the degradation and the humiliation and the treatment of the guards. And the way you treat each other, too. I mean, it extends to that.
You're no longer a human being when you walk in those doors. When I walked into that prison, I was no longer Damien Echols. I was SK931. They take away your name, they take away your humanity, your personality, and you become just a number in the system. It's the most brutal, barbaric conditions you can imagine. The guards would actually they would save up their money. They would put out a jar and they would put money in it so they could celebrate when the next execution was coming up. It's horrendously brutal. The thing that I always tell people now, whenever I'm talking about prison rehabilitation and reform, things like that, is the number of people, it's not just death row inmates who are subjected to those conditions. It's pretty much everybody in the prison system, at least in Arkansas. Well, the number of people that are actually going to spend the rest of their lives in prison, that are actually going to be executed, is tiny. It's a fraction. Most people that go to prison are one day going to be back out. They're going to be on the street. They're going to be in your church, in your school, in your neighborhood. So it's probably not the best idea to drive them insane before bringing them back out into the world. In the 20 years that I was in prison, I did not see one single shred of anything that could be remotely considered a rehabilitation program.
And he also said that the vast majority, anyway, you describe in detail the people around you, had either an old-fashioned term, but mental retardation or schizophrenia or some combination of both. I mean, these people didn't have your intellectual capacity.
The average IQ on death row is about 85, and the mental retardation, that's the way the law defines it. There's a very strict line. There's no gray areas. There's either a person is mentally retarded or they're not mentally retarded. If they are mentally retarded, the law says they can't be executed. If they are not, then they can be executed. They still execute people who are literally mentally retarded on a regular basis, people who are schizophrenic. The worst case in Arkansas was a guy who was guilty. He shot both of his in-laws and killed them, and then shot himself in the head trying to commit suicide. Well, he survived, but he had in essence given himself a lobotomy. When they got ready to execute this guy, they asked him, "What do you want for your last meal?" He says, "Pecan pie." He ate half of the pie. When they come to get him for the execution, he wraps the other half up and says, "I'm going to save this until after." They're executing people who don't even have the capacity to realize they're being executed.
You said, a couple of funny things in there. You said that the only good thing in prison are the toilets, that you can flush virtually anything down a toilet. Clothing, shoes,
Yes.
Hardware.
Yes.
Why?
I have no idea. Maybe they made them that way just so that they can't be clogged up. But
Yeah.
I have, people fish in the toilets.
Yeah,
if someone's
you got to
trying to
describe that.
Yeah, pass something from one cell to another, they can actually pull it up through toilets. I've seen an entire bed sheet be flushed down a prison toilet.
All right, and describe that scene with the mosquitoes. I think that was of all the horrors in that prison, the idea that I'd be eaten alive by mosquitoes, I have to think.
Yes, the prison there's nothing in any direction except fields, as far as you can see in the prison, so it's a breeding ground for mosquitoes, especially inside the prison in empty cells. They breed in the toilets of the empty cells. They will literally drive you insane. There were times when I could barely flex my fingers because my knuckles were just so covered in mosquito bites and my hands are swollen. They bite your eyelids, your lips. They buzz in your ears all night long to the point where the frustration is so bad you just want to cry. You give up on sleeping in an environment like that.
You said there would be whole walls covered with them.
Walls where they just nest. The entire wall will just be covered in mosquitoes.
What was it like walking out the door? I mean, you still got to be adjusting. It hasn't been that long.
I always tell people I didn't get used to being in prison in a single day, and I won't get used to being out in a single day. I've been out about 1 year and 8 months now. For the first 6 months of that, I was in a state of extreme shock and trauma. Almost 10 years in solitary confinement, and then out just the very next day out amongst humanity again. And to say it's overwhelming doesn't even come close to it. For at least 6 months, I could not do anything for myself, by myself. I was scared all the time. And then eventually I realized the only way I was going to get through that is if I sort of threw myself into everything that I was scared of. If you force yourself through things, it loses its power over you. And I was scared of things, you know, like going to the store and, you know, when you buy something at the grocery store, the little thing you slide your card through to pay for it. I had never seen one of those before. So just seeing that was enough to almost paralyze me with fright, not knowing how to do the simplest thing.
Computer.
I had never seen, when I got out of prison in 2011, I had not seen a computer since 1986. And back then it was basically a glorified typewriter for rich people.
What about your two co-defendants? Do you have any contact with them at all right now?
With one of them, he lives in Seattle now. He's in law school, or he's in college. He wants to eventually go to law school and be able to help people in the same situation that we were in. The thing is, he can't practice law until we're completely exonerated. The other guy only had an IQ of 68 to begin with, and then you dump all this trauma on top of that, and they've pretty much made sure he'll never live anything close to a normal life. He doesn't know anything outside of Arkansas, so he's scared to leave. But he's scared they're going to find some way to put him back in prison, so he never leaves his house. He's a complete shut-in. From what I've heard, he doesn't even have a phone. He's pretty much severed all contact with the outside world.
Do you think anyone else will ever be charged with this crime?
We're pushing. We're doing everything we can to see that it happens, but so far we've been met with just a complete refusal to look at the evidence that's been brought forward. They won't look at the DNA. They won't listen to the new eyewitnesses, because if they do, it means they're going to have to admit they made a mistake. A lot of people have built political careers for themselves off of this case, and they don't want to give that up.
Sorry, what? Oh, yeah, why are you living in Salem? Sorry, they were talking to me.
Because we love it.
Yeah.
Just the tolerance. Whenever I was in prison, I had a list of things that I said, if they don't kill me, I want to do these things. And number one on that list was go see a Boston Red Sox game. So I went to see a game whenever I got out, and while we were there, we came to visit Salem. And, you know, there's a lot of tourist-type attractions there. You can take trolley rides and see the whole town. And my wife and I both absolutely fell in love with it.
So the witch thing had nothing to do with it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The history of it, that's what's made it such a tolerant place. It's like they've made the mistake once, and they don't want to repeat the same thing again. So it's made them a very accepting community. It's sort of like a mecca for people who practice any sort of alternative spirituality now. That thing is not only accepted, but it's embraced. It's encouraged.
Do you work now?
I do.
All right. Damien Echols, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
All right, that is it for Greater Boston. Adam Riley has a look at what's on Beat the Press tomorrow.
Emily, we've got two stories about prying eyes on this week's Beat the Press. First, the Department of Justice is snooping on phone records at the AP. And second, Bloomberg reporters are snooping on Bloomberg business clients. Plus, why you won't be seeing the Whitey Bulger trial on TV when it starts next month. That's Beat the Press tomorrow at 7.
All right, thanks, Adam. We lead you now with scenes from today at Fresh Pond in Cambridge. I'm Emily Rooney. Thanks for watching.